This is a dangerous groups that we're dealing with now. It was a nightmare.
Flight 807, you're clear for landing, runway 7, Bravo.
All personnel report to the nearest tornado shelter. This is not a drill.
If you need help, then dial your operator.
Have no fear, fellow citizens. The Mediator is here.
Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of The Mediator with me, your host, Brian West, here to give you the top 8 headlines and developing news stories that made in this week. Now, as usual, I'll give you the top 8 local headlines and developing news stories that made in first, followed by a movie clip, a skit, a trailer, or something that's going on in the community, or maybe some pictures. And then I'll give you the top 8 international headlines and developing news stories that made it in. So let's waste no time, folks. Let's get to it. Story number 1. The local arts community is finding ways to stay alive. COVID-19 has hit the local arts community really hard financially, but each venue is finding a way to stay alive. Some with grants and other things that are incentives for the arts community now, from painting on sidewalks to public art displays and even painting on buildings. The arts are everywhere. The local arts community was hit so hard by the pandemic that many artists and musicians lost a lot of money because they could not perform. Now in a very slow recovery. Artists are doing everything they can to make up for the lost time, and that includes pencil art. Story number 2. We're still trying to reach out to the next local generation. I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Show them all the beauty they possess inside. Give them a chance. The local community is doing everything possible to reach out to the next generation. In a wave of crimes involving youth, reaching out to the next generation seems to be constantly on the minds of local business leaders and residents. There have been so many headlines circulating around this evolving issue that it's been crazy. Now, at the moment, everyone is trying to find some way to keep children busy and active and to stay afloat to save the future. Now, local teens made headlines after being charged in a fight and shooting incident at the 8400 block of Market Street. Now, a fight involving about 10 juveniles was reported. Now, with so many incidents involving young teens, everyone is wondering how we can reach the next level, the next local generation before they ruin their lives, and it's too late. And that's why story number 2 made it in this week. Story number 3. Mel Creek Park is what local patrons, people, residents, everybody needs right now. The Mel Creek Park, doing it in the park. Oh yeah, Mel Creek Park. Mel Creek Park has been making some major upgrades. The park seems to be a lifesaver during the pandemic as people go outside to venture out into nature, smelling the flowers, walking the dog. You know, really, really nice. There's also some nasty people doing some things in Mel Creek Park. Keep it clean, folks. Park has to stay afloat, you know. We can't always be nasty. We've got to be good. Good is what keeps things afloat. Please keep the park clean. Now, at the moment, Mel Creek Park seems to be a sure investment. People are donating to keep tourists and park enthusiasts happy, and the model seems to be working for the park even in hard times. Upgrades to roads and Fellows Riverside Garden have all been taking place this year. This is good news, folks. If local officials can focus on such venues that are already in place, like the park, this could really build on the future of tourism and expand the horizon with so much to do in the park. And that includes love and reason. That's what we used to do. You were my desire. Story number 4. Local teens learn how government works. Learning how the government works at an early age can be beneficial to anyone living in a uniform society. 8 area local teens took part in the Buckeye Girls and Boys State program developed for teens to see the value of learning about how government works at an early age. This story exemplifies the first step in pushing the next generation to learn more about how government works. Big headline. That's why story number 4 made it in this week. Story number 5. What is First Energy's side of the story? The story that hit Ohio like a hammer about Larry Householder and SB6 really has put the attention on First Energy and energy policies. Now, hearing First Energy's story is a huge way to balance out the details in how this story is being managed and how serious it's being taken. Now, with settlements on the way, the story is almost at its peak, but the big talking point in this story is hearing First Energy's side of the story. And there's a lot of details on each side, but it would be nice to see what the energy company has to say. And that's why story number 5 made it this week. Story number 6. The local justice system is once again in the headlines. Youngstown is dripping in crime, and many residents want answers, especially the family of a teen that was just murdered at a local gas station. The number one question from the mother of a teenager who was killed at a gas station on the south side is, why was the suspect released from jail and allowed out on the street? This is a big question. Now, there seems to be a lot more to this developing story, but another headline this week then surfaced about a body being found on the north side, showing that Youngstown has to get it together crime-wise, and at the moment they seem to be at a point of no return. Now, these stories are all shining light on why the local justice system is staying in the headlines. Local residents are voicing their concerns and blaming flaws in the justice system to maintain order by keeping criminals off of the street. This is a very serious story that has to stay alive. Incidents like these are becoming too common and have to stop. This is a very bad news story. My heart goes out to the family of the teen lost in this incident. Very sad story. It almost made it to the top 2 this week. Story number 7 in the top 2 local headlines and developing news stories that made it this week. Top 2 stories. Don't you feel it? COVID-19 cases back on the rise. COVID-19 stories have dominated the headlines, and Americans are still on high alert. The big talking point in this story is that there are maybe a few weapons, but one common sense way to approach this still evolving story that's been in the news for a long time. Now, at the time, we may have to just roll with the punches. That may be one solution. Just go with the flow and see what happens. COVID-19 stories have been repetitiously in the headlines, providing people with only a few options to win this battle. That's either roll with the punches, get vaccinated, wear a mask, or just catch the virus and get cured and hope for the best. Now, some people are even stressing vaccine mandates, which are really un-American. I mean, mandatory vaccinations, that doesn't sound like freedom to me. Now, but some people are actually considering this as the only solution. Now, in some cases, it has already started, some of these mandates, but I mean, what can you say in a country that has so many resources, so many doctors, so many professionals, so many chiefs, and probably not enough people pulling the load? But there's probably a lot of people who feel they have the answers, but just kind of go with the flow and see what happens. Now, in this story, independent thinkers are battling with insiders who have invested by well, they've invested in vaccines. They've invested heavily in the vaccines, America, period. And they can't afford for these vaccines to go to waste. And that could be what's really behind the driving force of this growing story. Story number 8 and the top lucky number 8 ball local story that made it this week. I've got a story to tell. What will it take to make the Valley optimistic about the future? Crime, corruption, and a failing education system has people wondering why the Valley is on the verge of losing optimism. Optimism is always a driving force to keep any system up and running, but Valley residents are voicing their concerns about how hard it has been to remain optimistic in these trying times. I mean, you're on the verge of a pandemic and you are already in poverty, so that's pretty. You have to believe in something and try to stay optimistic. Now, the local community has been hit so hard with unusual circumstances that there seems to be a lot of questions and answers about how hard it is to keep things on the path to a better and more certain future. Uncertainty is what's giving Valley residents nightmares, and that's why story number 8 made it to the top this week. We have to be certain about the future. You have land, water. I mean, put a generator in there. Let's do something with what we have. We have to use intelligence, and people want productivity. They want to see growth. They want to see certainty. And that's why story number 8 made it to the top this week. Well, those are our top 8 local headlines and developing news stories that made this week. I'll be right back with the top 8 international headlines and developing news stories. So don't go anywhere. You're in the Mediator with me, Brian West. I'll be right back. Welcome back. Now it's time to get to the top 8 international headlines and developing news stories that made it this week. Folks, we've got to get over this COVID thing. You know, personally, I've been kind of very sick of seeing people cowering up, crying and hiding, and you have to face your fears in life sometimes. You know, as the mediator, I often go out into the jungle every day, and I see wild animals. But I learned that the running can only last for so long until you have to face off against the beasts. And that's when you've got to put a smile on your face and go into battle, folks. And that's what we've been doing with COVID. We gotta fight! Gotta fight. And that's my story, folks. And I'm sticking to it. Let's get to it. Story number 1. Why the world has to stay reminded about being poor versus being rich. Every day the world is learning about having a lot versus having a little. People with a lot keep getting tapped for cash, and people that have a little keep getting tapped for work. This is the main idea when it comes to this story. Some people are blaming the rich, but could it be deeper? Does the country need to go back to old school deal making without the long process of paperwork or walls being put up? When I say walls, I mean going into a bank and realizing that you can't get a loan because of something you did 10 or 5 years ago. This is a witness. I'm a witness. The main fact in this story is that almost everyone is dodging critical thinking when it comes to interest rates and decision making by the long term decision making for the long term. Now, the long term solution seems to be getting people, the poor poorer and the rich richer in some scenarios. Now, somehow, some way, we have to get on the same page to make this process of production work smoother. One story in the Atlantic even points out how the IRS is targeting the poorest Americans, leaving the question of how can you get people to pay up, especially when in most cases they can barely keep themselves afloat, and they can barely keep themselves in the game because they don't have the money. So how do you get money from people who don't have the money? That's why story number 1 made it in this week. Story number 2. Could it be that some people are just disconnected from the bigger picture? We're learning this on a day-to-day basis. Americans are catching on to what people know and don't know, but the divide is big. In this story, there really is a bigger picture that some people are just not connected to. It means the real deal, what actually goes on every day in the news, and some people just don't keep up, and they fall behind, and it's very, very sad. Now it's like this. Here's a good example. It's like living in a world on autopilot. Then the autopilot all of a sudden just stops working once you figure out what is actually really happening around you. Now, as new forces try to keep people informed and more violent stories keep making the front page news, this story keeps gaining steam because there are people who are just getting very, very tired of people who have no clue of what is actually happening around them. And that's why story number 2 made it in this week. Story number 3. Some major companies have been very profitable in these hard times. Google, Apple, and Microsoft have stayed profitable in these tough times. Now, what makes this story unique is how they've been able to do it. And there's been a lot of eyes on these companies, and the key in how they've been able to maintain such power in such a competitive market. Now, in this dominant tech age, there is only speculation surrounding how companies maintain wealth in this story, and that is what the main reason why it made it this week. How can you stay wealthy when you have coders all around you, people building all these programs? What is your catch? Are you buying these companies? Are you giving them an offer that they can't refuse to stay in business so you can't lose the game of winning? That's what's in this story. Now, when looking at the data compared to small and other businesses, the tech world has remained relevant, important, while everything else seems to be falling apart. Tech has changed everything. Technology, the way we work, the way we live, the way we speak, the way we interact. Now, what analysts will be focusing on is how. How do you remain profitable in a market that is on the downward swing, but is staying alive because of technology? And that's why story number 3 made it. Story number 4. Student loan debt headlines stay alive. They're staying alive. Education is expensive, and a promise to cancel student loan debt could cost even more. Here is another thought factor in this story. How do you account for inflation when talking about increasing tuition rates? Net worth is also keeping this story alive because no one wants to hire an overqualified person for an ordinary job. Put people out of business, could wake a lot of people up. This headline is keeping the concept of knowledge, power, money, and how to pay for education alive. This is a real deal story when taking the concept of education and the cost of learning in today's environment into account. One CNBC report goes on the record stating that Nancy Pelosi feels that Joe Biden doesn't have the power to cancel student loan debt, which is showing what is actually happening in this story. Debates and everything is keeping the story alive, and that's why story number 4 made it in this week. Well, those are our top 4 international headlines and developing news stories that made this week. I'll be right back with the top 4. Don't go anywhere. I almost slipped up and made a mistake, but I got it. Don't worry. I'll be right back. You're in the Mediator with me, Brian West. If you want to check out the stories that almost made it in or did make it in, go to our Twitter feed on our website. Check out everything. All of the sources are there. Go to the website. Welcome back. Welcome back. Now it's time to get to the top 4 international headlines and developing news stories that made it this week. Folks, I feel inspired. I feel inspired to get in between and tell you something to encourage you in these hard times. Find a way to make things work. That's what Americans do. That's what we do. We've got to come together and start bonding and realizing our own true powers. When you want to take bread from your fellow brother that has no bread, you've got to learn to share. Why file a lawsuit when you can spend time bonding and getting to know one another? Evil is only a pathway to prove that goodness exists. And that's why we need mediation. The fighting, the bloodshedding has put me off my team. We must find a way to believe in each other and stop the violence. It's getting us nowhere. Don't you feel much better? That's my story, folks, and I'm sticking to it. Let's get to it. Story number 5. I feel much better. Police stories are staying in the headlines. Here we go. Police stories are staying alive. Headlines pointing out fashions of life that degrade and taint the process of policing the profession by giving people a close-up look at what goes on while upholding the law and upholding order. Upholding law and order. So what's been happening in this story is it's giving you a close-up look at what goes on. Nasty, fighting, sweating stuff when you have to handle law and order. Criminals, suspects, violent acts of, especially when you know that person is committing crimes, it's violent, folks. Countless videos have been in constant circulation showing the world how police officers engage with the public. This story provides multiple ways to view law and order. You can either look at it from the officer's side or the criminal side, or you can look at it from the fact that somebody could just possibly be innocent. But what outside groups are focusing on now is the root of the major cause of what's keeping this story alive. How do you live without crime fighters? There are so many policing stories making headlines that they're adding a lot of weight to a domestic call for change. But how do you change things when people continue to break the rules? And that's why story number 5 made it in this week. Story number 6. Tracking economic growth and spending from each class of citizens. Every ethnic group is now focused on economics. Blacks, Asians, whites, Latinos, etc. At the moment, everyone is so focused on economics that they're doing the extreme to keep that mighty dollar circulating in their neck of the woods. The flow of cash inside of communities is becoming such a central issue that it's turning people onto the concept of channeling cash flow to curb people's spending habits within other communities and into theirs. Now, this talk is circulating in a lot of diverse circles. It means in a lot of different circles. Now, the good thing about economic growth and spending habits from each class is the simple fact that it gives people the incentive to study and learn how money works and the power of money. This story is critical because it's linked to so many other connected stories in society concerning economics and getting people to understand the power of the mighty dollar, their own mighty dollar. That's why story number 6 almost made it to top 2 this week. Story number 7 in the top 2 international headlines and developing news stories that made it this week. Top, we've got to the top. Ooh wee, ooh, oh, got to the top. If you were getting ahead, there's a good chance that COVID-19 pushed you back. More stories are making headlines about the state of the world's finances. COVID-19 is the nagging issue that just won't go away. The story has been in top headlines for almost 2 years now. COVID-19 has literally pushed a lot of people on the brink of starvation, if not already in starvation. It's pretty sad. Now, what got this story in is the influx of data coming in showing the cycle of poverty getting worse, especially amongst minority groups compared to the majority. Pretty sad. COVID-19 seems to have made things worse and has left people with no choice but to try and get things back on track. This story is a big headline, and that's why I made it to the top 2 this week. Story number 8 and the top international headline and developing news story that made it this week. Don't you feel much better? You've seen my face smiling, looking in the mirror, singing happy songs. I've got confidence in you. You can do what you want to do when you want to do it. Because if everything is coming to an end, why not make a day out of today and start a new beginning by looking at my face? Story number 8. Does America have a certain, now when I say certain, that means confirmed plan for the future? The attention seems to be on what works and doesn't work, what's real and unreal, and what can be done but can't be done. At the moment, America is on a pace of spending that is growing every day. With the Biden administration on the move, so many people want to know about the major plan, as if there is a plan. Like if there is a plan that could really get America back on the grounds of financial certainty and future certainty. It's almost like feeding children healthy foods, raw vegetables. Sometimes you got to mix it up to make it appealing. So is this plan that we're on, are they mixing it up to make it sound good? And in the end, is it going to be bad for us, filled with sugar? Or are we going to be eating some raw vegetables to get us on the right track? And that's why story number 8 made it to the top, outlasted all stories. Does America have a plan for this country and for the beacon of light for the whole world to see? The shining country, nation on the other side of the oceans, coast to coast. Do we have a plan? And that's why story number 8 made it to the top this week. Well, I hope you got something out of today's program. I always get something out of the research. As usual, I'd like to thank all the news outlets, the front people on the front lines, the media, the journalists. You deserve all the credit. I'm just the media, the man in the middle. If you want to show some support here at Method 8, me, little old me, it doesn't take much. All you have to do is to buy something, click on something, watch something, read something, or just sponsor a program. Folks, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to look through over 200 or more stories and come back in here next week to give you what you need to stay informed. Thank you for tuning to the Mediator. It's with me, Brian West. Have a good week, everybody. Peace.
Have no fear, fellow citizens.